last few weeks, we have been studying the Constitution on Divine Revelation. What I would like to do today is to summarize that by reiterating two very important statements that that document makes, and then giving you some practical suggestions. This will be our last program until the fall, and we'll talk a bit about that a little later. When we look at the whole document, the Constitution on Divine Revelation, what I want you to remember is to see it as a whole, that the Old Testament leads to the New Testament, and that all of sacred Scripture, remotely or right in front of us, is about Jesus. The first part of the Bible is about the preparation for the coming of the Messiah, and then the Messiah comes. So everything in Scripture is oriented toward Jesus. Secondly, please remember that statement, that God in His wisdom has so brought it about that the New Testament should be hidden in the Old, and the Old should be made manifest in the New. And therefore we have to look at it as a whole, one complete work with one author, God, and many writers. And we practically speaking don't know the names of very many of the writers at all. What can I tell you now that summer is approaching? I'd like to make a couple of suggestions. As a matter of fact, maybe 3. I would encourage you to look at the Old Testament. And people get afraid and say, oh my, it's so big, and there's so many names and so many places. I don't know, I get so far and I'm so confused, I put it down. Go to the Old Testament. If you don't do anything else but read the book of Exodus, you've got it. Because that's the main story of the Old Testament. Everything in the Old Testament hinges on that story of the Exodus. It's a long book, 40 chapters. Read it and reread it. And even if you read nothing else in the Old Testament, know that story like the back of your hand. Secondly, I would encourage you to pick up one of the Gospels. Maybe not start with John. That is very deeply theological. But pick Matthew, Mark, or Luke and read it through. And here's something that might sound kind of different. Whenever we read a Gospel, we have to put on our resurrection eyeglasses. In other words, if the resurrection hadn't occurred, there wouldn't be a New Testament. And we wouldn't be talking about Jesus as Messiah. So everything in the gospel, in one way or another, is not only talking about Jesus, but the life of the church today. I'll give you an example. Bartimaeus, the blind man. Once he was able to see, he takes off his cloak and runs toward Jesus. Seeing was about believing. And Bartimaeus becomes an image of a person who can see with the eyes of faith, takes off the person they used to be, and will enter the water of baptism, and then follows Jesus as a disciple. But that taking off the garment is what the Christians did in the early church. They took off their garments, went down into the water, put on the white garment. It's a baptismal story. Now, do you have to know all of this to enjoy the Gospels? No, but sometimes ask yourself, what does this say about the risen Christ in the church today? And lastly, I would just like to share with you some books. During the summer, you can visit a library or a bookstore, and there are so many good things out on sacred scripture today. Here are a few books. I just got this book, Letter and Spirit, by Scott Hahn. It is a beautiful book, and I know I'm going to read it slowly. It's about the sacred scriptures and the liturgy. This is a must-read. And then my favorite teacher of all time was a woman by the name of Megan McKenna. She's written a lot of books. Two that I would suggest: a book called Not Counting Women and Children. Not Counting Women and Children. And she takes stories of women and children in the Bible and explains them in terms of today's world. She also wrote a recent book called And Morning Came, and it's all about the resurrection accounts in the Bible. So have a good summer, and don't let it be a vacation from God. Immerse yourself in the scriptures. And although Early Morning Catechism will not have any new programs until the week of September 8th, we will have available to you some of our programs from the past year. So go to Early Morning Catechism and click on one that you missed or one that you want to see again. In the meantime, God bless you and have a wonderful summer.